How many of you have had a moment like that little piggy where nobody thought you could do it? Everybody doubted you. And you just threw yourself into the hands of God, and unbelievably, God was there to catch you and to carry you. That is a common experience for the children of God. That's kind of how we are expected to live. That's the level of trust God wants us to have in Him. The kind of love that just turns away everybody's opinion and focuses only on what God's word is and what God desires to do. Today, after the message, we're going to invite some people who are people of great faith, godly character, to come to the front, and they're going to be here ready to pray for you. And if you feel that this is a step that you want to take, that God wants you to take, to come and to be prayed for a miraculous healing, then we'd invite you to come forward. I just wanted to start off with that to tell you that's where we're going with this thing. And so just to prepare your hearts, and maybe even now, begin to ask the Lord, Lord, is this a moment that you would have for me to come forward? Healing is very, very important in the Bible. All the way through the stories of Jesus and all the way through the Christian Bible, where it talks about all the disciples and how they did everything, there's story after story after story of miraculous healings. There's lots of other stories too, and I will share a little bit about that. But just in Jesus' stories, the first 4 books of the Christian Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there's about 30 separate stories. Sometimes they repeat, but that wouldn't be the 30, it'd be more if they repeat. So 30 individual stories. And then the writers, those guys said, and there's a whole lot more, whole lot more that we didn't tell you about that Jesus did. So there's probably hundreds and hundreds of times that Jesus healed people. But there is one that you guys wouldn't be familiar with, because unless you've gone to seminary like I didn't have higher learning in this area, there's one very controversial healing in the Bible. And I'll share that with you. And that very controversial healing had to do with Peter, when Jesus healed his mother-in-law. And it's like, why? And so we still don't really know why Jesus would do such a thing, but that's one of the controversial ones in the Bible that we have. Just mysteries. Why? Moving right along. So we have these stories of Jesus healing time and time again. But we also have this experience in our own lives where it's very common for us who have been in church or not or anything like that, for us to tell somebody, maybe a pastor or maybe somebody that we know as a strong Christian, will say, I'm suffering with this illness. I'm suffering with this problem right here. And many times the response of the person to your asking will be very similar to this. Well, do you believe that God can heal you? And of course, you're not given a lot of choice there. You kind of have to say, well, yes, I do believe that. And maybe that's very genuinely your response. Yes, I do believe that God can heal me. And so usually the thing that follows up with that is, well, if you have faith, if you let us believe in faith that God will, and let us trust that God will give you a miraculous healing. And you're like, okay, that we can do that. I can do that. Well, then let me pray for you. Please pray for me. And so they pray for you. And then you're like living in expectation. What is God going to do? How is this whole thing going to work out? But as a little bit of time goes by, you're saying, well, He didn't heal me quickly. I'm still waiting. And then more time goes by and more time goes by. And at some point, a little bit of disappointment starts to snowball. And at some point, it's a lot of disappointment, saying, whoa, what happened? What happened? I believed, I had faith, I thought. And then you start getting this dark cloud that comes over you, and you begin to ask yourself, what did I not do right? Because I do know that God does heal. So obviously, it had to be me. Did I have a sin in my life? Did I not have enough faith? And it just turns right around on us. That is not God's plan. That is not God's word. That is not how God wants our response to be. And we look at this thing, and it just bugs us, because I know God could, but God didn't. What do I do with that? We read many places in the Bible where Jesus says all things are possible if you believe. Well, I believed, and all things, I would hope, would include the miracle, and that didn't happen. So where does that leave me? And then where do I go from here? How is it that I'm supposed to grow closer to God? How is it that I'm supposed to trust him for a healing? I don't even know if I'll ever ask him again, because it kind of seems to be that God just does what he's going to do if I ask or not. So instead of just asking, instead of having faith, why don't I just sit back and watch and wait and accept whatever he chooses to do? Where am I in that whole thing? And that's a common question that all of us struggle with. And a lot of us are stopped in our tracks because of an expectation that God didn't meet. But what does that mean when God doesn't heal? If it's not about our quantity of faith, if it's not about, well, we did this or we didn't do that, if it's all about what God decides to do, where does that leave us with God? Well, I think number one is to hear something that we're not told very often. There's a lot of stories in the Bible of illnesses that God did not heal, or Jesus did not heal. There's one, we don't talk about these a lot, the guy named Trophimus. Trophimus, just very simply, Trophimus in 1 Timothy got sick, and Paul, who had healed many, under God's authority, had led many people to a healing. He just said, well, poor Trophimus is sick. Let's just let him go, and let's move on. It's like, oh, he was sick. Couldn't anybody just pray for him? Couldn't somebody do something? I'm sure they prayed for him, but at some point, Trophimus didn't get any better. Paul's protege, Timothy, in 2 Timothy. Timothy was sick. I'm sure they prayed for Timothy. God didn't miraculously heal Timothy either. In fact, it got to the point where Paul gave some advice. Well, maybe if you would drink this or do that, or that would kind of help you be a little bit healthier, Maybe stop eating at McDonald's or something like that. It was that kind of a thing. Well, why didn't God heal Timothy? Well, I think Paul would, of all of them in 2 Corinthians, Paul is very clear that he wasn't healed either. He talks about a thorn in his flesh. Now, to be honest, we don't really know what exactly was that thorn. Was it a physical illness? A lot of people think, yeah, I think it was a physical illness because of a better picture around describing it. But the bottom line is, God said, I'm not going to relieve you of that. As much as you ask me, as much as you're calling out to me, as much as you're trusting me, I'm making a decision. I'm not going to take that thorn out of your flesh. I'm going to leave it there. But what I am going to do is I am going to show you that you don't need that thorn taken out of your flesh as much as you need my grace in your life. Because if you have me in your life, if you have my grace in your life, you're going to be able to overcome that thorn still living in you. It'll be enough. My grace will be enough to overcome whatever negativity that thorn creates in your life. And that's what Paul accepted. Was it his choice? Absolutely not. He was asking God to take that away. But God said, this is how I'm going to do this. And at some point, Paul had to come to the point in his life where he said, okay, God, I understand your decisions. I do know that you are very good, and I do know that you are faithful. And I'm going to trust that, and that's where I'm going to go with this. That's what I'm going to believe in this thing. There's times where it's not God. Jesus wanted to heal people, but there was an obstacle to that. He couldn't heal people. And it's very clearly in his own hometown where he went back and he said, I would like to do miracles here. I'd like to heal people. I'd like to help people. But because of your unbelief, my hands are tied. I can't do anything here. So there also is that aspect of when it comes to a healing, when it comes to miraculous healing, there's also that responsibility for us to really believe that he can. That's the beginning of it. It's responding to who God is and what God can do. That's the first thing. I believe you can. I have faith. I do think you can do this. And we see that faith, that is a necessary ingredient in every type of healing. It's that confidence that God can do this. But there is one story that confronts this in such an interesting way. And it's in Mark chapter 9. And what it is, it's a story of just after a miraculous event with Jesus and a couple of his disciples where the Bible talks about being transfigured. So in a very supernatural way, he had an experience with God and a couple of the prophets from thousands of years ago appearing to him, and there'd be a physical transformation of himself. So this is an amazing moment that Jesus had with a few of his disciples called the Transfiguration. You can read it there just before this story in Mark 9. And then what happens is Jesus comes down off the mountain with his disciples, And he's just, been up here, and immediately now he's down here, because what he finds is the disciples he left behind are in a terrible argument with the religious leaders. And what happened was a man whose son was trying to kill himself, and they believed it was because he was possessed by a demon that kept throwing him into the fire, kept throwing him into convulsions, kept making his body very rigid, and it was kind of like an epileptic kind of a situation by the description of it. And this man had brought his son to the disciples, who were charged, given authority to cast out demons and to heal people, and they couldn't. As much as they did trying to heal this boy, nothing worked. And so this father was arguing, and he gotten the other religious leaders together, and they were arguing with the disciples when Jesus comes walking in and he sees what's going on. And Jesus' question is, what are you guys arguing about? What are you fighting about? And so they tell him the story. He says, I came to your disciples and they couldn't do anything. And what's Jesus' response to that is, this unbelieving generation. He talks about, it's through prayer, but it's also through believing. It's believing that God can. And if you believe, anything can happen. Everything can happen. So that's where we'll come into this story. Here in Mark chapter 9, and I'll begin here with verse 20. And so Jesus says, call the boy to me. Let me see the boy. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, the evil spirit in the boy, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus caught the father's response. If you can do, and Jesus repeats it back to him. If you can, Jesus said, everything is possible for one who believes. It's not a matter of if. Everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. How many times have I come before the Lord? And I said, I know you can, but there's a part of me that doubts that you really will. A few years ago, I was in a situation, I was unemployed, I did not have health insurance, I was in a mess, and I had been stung by a bee, and my leg just swelled right up. I think, you've got to be kidding. What is wrong with this? And it got infected. It swelled right up, and because I did not want to go to the doctors, I was scared to death of the medical bill, as well as I should have been, because it got to a point where I just had to go and go bankrupt, if that's what it means. And I went, and sure enough, they did hardly anything, but gave me, a prescription for a free antibiotic. And so I went there, but then I did get this enormous bill from the doctor's office, the urgent care. And I was so discouraged from that. I was just mad. And I said, here I am in this situation. I really needed God to do something. I asked God, and nothing happened. I was just mad. And what do you think happens like a week or two later? I got stung by another bee. You've got to be kidding. And this time it was on this arm. And what do you think this arm? I'm not allergic to bees, but for some goofy reason, it swelled right up again like it was infected. And I'm saying, this is insane. Why would this happen? And I was literally driving down the street there in Guilford, Connecticut. I could even take you to the spot where it was. And I was just crying my eyes. I said, I can't believe this. What am I going to do? I'm not going to go back to the doctors. And I just remembered, God does heal. But I kept saying this, but he doesn't. He used to heal me, but he's got something against me, or he doesn't need me anymore, and I'm just kind of done with this. And I remember having no other solution, no other answer, and I just knew it was just going to get worse, and I didn't know what to do. And so what did I do? I said the crummiest prayer you've ever heard. In my car at a red light, I said, God, I know you can heal me, but I also know that you won't. I know you've gone on and you're doing other things. But if all you need is a question, me to ask, I will give you the request. Although I don't think you're going to do it, but I will request that you do. Please heal me of my arm. It really hurts. It's going to get worse, and I'm broke. And I left it at that. And you won't believe what happened the next, well, you will believe, because I wouldn't tell the story if this didn't have a happy ending, right? The next morning, I woke up, but I didn't open my eyes because I was too afraid to see my arm. Because now it wasn't just about the infection. Now it was about God abandoning me. It was God wasn't interested anymore. And I opened up my eyes to accept whatever it was, and you wouldn't believe it. My arm looked as normal can be. And I thought, wow, look at that. And then that just reassured my faith and got me going down the road. And, here I am remembering that moment. I know it's not a great healing story, but it's a personal one to me. It was a time of a great emotional crisis to me when God came in and did something spectacular in my life. I was very grateful for that. And there's other times where God just hears the shortest prayers, literally 3 or 4 words, and that's all Jesus needs to heal. Sometimes he doesn't have to speak, and he heals somebody. There in Mark chapter 5, you got the story of the woman who had spent everything that she had. She's probably deep into bankruptcy. And there was no doctor that could help her. There was nothing. And then Jesus is walking through her town on his way to another place, on his way to help somebody else. And this lady didn't know Jesus, didn't know anybody who knew Jesus. She just heard that this guy can heal you. And in her head, she thought, if I could just touch him, just to touch his clothes, the robe, the hem of his robe, I know that God can heal me. She had that faith. And here's Jesus, who didn't even know her, didn't acknowledge her, didn't speak to her, walks right through, and she somehow sticks her hand through the crowd and just touches the hem of his robe, just touches, somehow grabs hold of that. And Jesus stops because he said, I felt healing power go out of me. The people around us says, what are you talking about? Everybody's crowding in around you. Everybody is touching you. What do you mean, who touched me? And Jesus says, no. Somebody just didn't touch me. Somebody with faith pulled out a healing power from me and has been healed. And he turned around, and sure enough, there's the lady. And what is Jesus' words to her? It's just like with everybody. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you. That's what made you. What was your faith? And, you don't have to go too much further. You go over there in Matthew chapter 8. There's a Roman centurion, not even a Jew, not even a part of the religious group. Somebody that a lot of people would have despised. And here was this man whose servant was near death. And this centurion, this Roman officer in the Roman Empire, Roman army, came to Jesus. And he said, can you heal my servant? But this is what he said, very interestingly. He says, you don't even have to go see my servant. You can just say, would you heal my servant? Just ask God to heal my servant. My servant will be healed. And he makes an interesting comparison. He says, I'm in the army. I don't have to go see everything. I can just tell this officer, go do that, and he does it. I don't have to see it. I know that it's done because I told him to go do it. And in the same way, I know you have that kind of authority, Jesus, that if you would just say, he be healed, my servant would be healed. And Jesus was shocked. Shocked. Because this guy didn't ask him, go do this, go do that. Just said, I know that he can. And Jesus said, I have not seen faith like this in all of Israel. This is amazing. Somebody that shouldn't have had any faith had more faith than anybody. And Jesus was so moved by that. So moved by that. Same thing. You know what? When you get home, you look at your servant, he's going to be well. Your faith has healed you. Your faith has made you well. That's Jesus' response. It's just like that. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of hocus pocus. It's not a lot of crying out. It's not you have to pay or sacrifice and do all. No, just a simple request. Just, God, would you do this? That's all it is. And that faith moves God to do the miraculous. And that moves God to do an amazing thing. What is it that amazes God about us? Our good lives? No, not really. What is it that amazes God with us? By our great amount of faith? Yes. Your faith amazes God. That's what God says back to us. Look at that faith. Look at that faith. That's what makes God stop and take notice is the great amount of faith that we have that he does do miracles, that he does heal us. And that's where it was. And who here believes in miracles? I would say if you go to church, you're going to hear a lot about miracles because it's something that's fairly common in the life of a church. We pray for people, and the miraculous happens. We hear it all the time. Lots of us have stories. If you have a story of what you would consider, what anybody else might consider a miraculous healing story, just raise your hand a little bit. Look at that. See how many? It's a very common thing. It's a very common thing. It's what God does. We have every reason. But you know who else really believes in miracles? And this kind of blows your mind when you think about it. The medical world. Your doctor. Your doctor, your medical staff, the nurses at your hospital where you go. They believe in miracles a lot more than just the general population. Why? Because they're in that field. They're in that field. They see their patients come in. They see people who believe, and they see wonderful things happen, miraculous things happen, things that nobody can explain. People, doctors that are just yeah, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, and this can't be proved scientifically, but I'm going to tell you, when those people prayed, my patient's life changed. I don't know what it is, but this picture is very different from that picture. And so doctors believe. They did a survey. They found out that 73% of doctors themselves had seen a miracle in their practice, a miracle that nothing could explain. It was as a result of prayer. And they found that another 55% of doctors had also seen a miracle in the treatment of people. They said, we were just treating them, but this person had a miraculous response to the treatment. Just blew us away. Never explained it. The odds were not. I don't know how it happened, but through the treatment, this person responded in a magnificent way, and today they're very healthy. And that's the thing. And just about everybody, about a little over 80% of the general population, believes in the power of prayer, believes in the power of prayer to heal somebody. Why? How did it get to 80% plus? How does it get to that? By it never happening? No. None of us are like that. If I don't see it, I'm not going to believe it. That's kind of how we are. We all start. But when we see it, then we've learned something new. God does do miracles. God does answer prayer. God does respond to his calling out to him. So there's a learning. There's a learning by observing. We might come up with our own conclusions without information, but you live a little bit. You ask a few questions, and you get outside of yourself a little bit, and you start to gather more information about what's going on around you. You begin to learn that we do serve a God who does miracles today. We do serve a God who does miracles today. That God does answer our prayers. That's the normal life that we live. That's the normal world we live in. I want to share with you something that I've learned many, many years ago. My dad first told me this. I don't remember what the situation was, but somebody wasn't healed, and it really bugged me. And my dad shared that, no, God always heals, Greg, always heals. But he has 3 different ways that he heals people. He says, number 1 is the miraculous. When God does something, intervenes in a way that is no explanation to it. It's just God did this, and it's in response to prayer, and everybody's super excited. He says, that's what happens. It's just a miraculous healing. Yes, that's one of the ways that God heals, is in a miraculous way. I have a really good friend I grew up with, and he's a head cancer surgeon. And he gets on the magazine covers because people vote for him being the best. He's a lot of fun. And he called me one day. He's a faithful Christian, but he's not one of these, that is huge, to believe stuff just out of the blue. But he calls me one day. He says, Greg, I had a miracle. His name is Dan. I said, Dan, what are you talking about? What happened? And he talked about a patient of his that had cancer of the esophagus. And in the treatment of the cancer of the esophagus, what happens is a lot of times that there's either the radiation or the scraping of the tissues. What happens is, depending on who you are as a person, your own personal makeup and how your body reacts to things, sometimes your esophagus will scar up as a result of that. It's always going to scar up, but not to an unexpected extent that can happen with a small portion of the population. And he had this patient, and that's what happened. He saved him from that, but now they have to go through a feeding tube, and because of the esophagus, it had completely shut because of the scarring. This person would never be able to swallow again, never be able to eat again. Everything was have to be through a feeding tube. But this couple, they were believers in miracles, and they had their church praying for them. And what the test is when the patient comes, is you have them put their head back, and then you have a glass cylinder, and that you put the glass cylinder tube, a hollow tube, down through the throat. And if you can't get this tube down, that means you're not going to get food down. And that's the end of that. And unfortunately, that's what happened to this individual. They tried to get the tube, and it wouldn't go down. And so they went home discouraged, but in prayer, and they called him again. And they said, can you please get a second opinion on him being able to swallow? And my friend said, this isn't the kind of stuff you usually get a second opinion about. You get a second opinion about what future treatments, not what's already been and done. But this couple insisted that Get a second opinion. And he had a good friend in New York City and was an excellent surgeon, knew about this thing. And he sent all the results to him, all the x-rays and everything. And this guy got it, and he said, Dan, I don't know any more than you do. I see what I see, and this guy can't swallow, and that's the end of that. And so Dan goes and meets with the family and tells them, I'm sorry, but the x-rays are the x-rays, and this is the result, and this is how it's going to be now. And the wife said, no, our church is praying. Our church is praying for a miracle, and we really believe that God is going to do a miracle here for my husband. Would you please put the tube down his throat one more time? Would you please do that? And he's thinking, oh, again, we're going to go through this. And he says, yes, please do this. And so, sure enough, he goes through the tube, and to his shock and amazement, the tube went down. And he's like, what? And he's like, and I got the right tube, I got everything. And he goes and he takes more x-rays, and it's not even like the same person. It's like, what happened? Scar tissue doesn't disappear. What is going on? And he walked out into the waiting room, saw his wife, and his first thing was, do you believe in miracles? And the wife said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. He says, I do too. And he says, it's amazing. Your husband can swallow, no problem. And that's a personal, which I know is true by that. That is a miraculous healing. There's another type of healing that God does, and that's through a natural healing. And that's when a person is recovering. And God doesn't come in and do something unbelievable like that, but God uses medicine, or God uses skill, or God uses other things, but in a natural way, and this is usually one we're most familiar with, to really help somebody. All of us, come across somebody who was told, yeah, you've got a month to live, and they found that out, 10 years ago, and they're still going. It's things like that God comes in and does something like that God uses another way to heal us one way or the other. But those of us who have been healed like that, we all know that it's God. It's God that does that. It's God. Because it didn't have to be that way. And I was afraid it wasn't going to be, and I prayed. And I feel that what happened in my case, that God reached out and he really helped this whole thing come together. And that's a wonderful thing. So that's a natural healing. And then there's a third type of healing. There's the miraculous, there's the natural, and then there's the perfect healing. And this is the perfect healing, is when God says, no, I'm not going to heal you. I'm going to leave it as it is. But I'm going to promise you that I will be with you. I will go through this with you. And my grace will always be with you. And my strength will always be with you. And I will help you through this time, this difficult time. That's hard for us. That's hard for us. But why is it the perfect healing? Because ultimately, our true healing comes in our new resurrected bodies. When we are with God, that is the true healing. Because even though God might miraculously heal you today, someday you're going to pass away, and then you're going to be healed completely, perfectly. That's what we're looking forward to as Christians. So even through natural medicine, we might recover our health, but give it a little bit of time. At some point, down our health goes again, and God says, okay, I'm going to be with you through this phase. I'm going to be there with you. My cousin just passed away a couple months ago, Lori. We're in about the same age. We're all very close, mostly because of that age thing. And she had breast cancer a couple years ago, and then they took both of her breasts, and then did the mastectomy, did everything, and then next thing you know, she's in remission. We're all, oh, it's a miracle. This is so wonderful. And of course, a few months later, or couple years, about 18 months later, that cancer came back, insanely aggressive, a terrible cancer. And I saw Lori at my mother's funeral. Lori, at this point, had been under a lot of chemo, and she was very, very weak. And I couldn't believe that she came to my mother's funeral. I thought, oh, Lori, this is the last place I wanted to see you at my mom's funeral. That's what I was thinking. So I went and I talked to her, but that's not what Lori was thinking. Lori had a completely different experience where God was so close to her and so with her. She had her daughters, but God had given her peace through that. She had her husband, and God had given her peace about that. I said, that's something that only God can do. That's something only God can do. And sure enough, Lori passed away about a month after that. And we just all celebrated because we knew where Lori was, the perfect healing, the perfect healing. It didn't happen in this lifetime, but it did happen. And there she is. And there's a part of me that says, this life is very short, but eternity is a long time. If I'm going to be healed, make sure it's in eternity. And that's the good news for all of us. Ultimately, we all have the good news that we're going to be healed perfectly. And that's where we rest. I want to share with you guys in closing here a passage in Isaiah that is very important as we think about this. And this Isaiah chapter 40. Some of you know this, but I want to get to the end. I'm going to stop and ask you to read it with me. And this is what God is telling you. This is what God's telling us. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. Would you read this last part with me? But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Sometimes God does a miraculous healing in our lives where we soar like an eagle. We just soar. This is amazing what God has done. There's other times where we run and we do not grow weary. And that's sort of maybe the natural healing that God uses. He does something incredible to help us out and to get us through another phase. And maybe it puts the cancer in remission, or maybe it's something else. But regardless, man, we're running now. Man, we're really going. Look what God did. Look how God healed me also in this way. And we just go. And then there's the times where we're just walking. We're just walking. We don't think we can take another step. We just like, that's it. That's it. And what is God's promise to you? I'm not going to let you fall. I'm not going to go try it. I'm not going to let you give up. I'm going to be there for step by step by step. Step by step. And you're going to walk, and you're not going to faint. I'm going to be there. I'm going to walk with you. But when it's all said, when it's all done, you know where we all stand? You know what's true for every single one of these? Those who hope in the Lord. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. That's where we all are. Those who hope in the Lord. That's where it is. It's our hope in the Lord. That's where it is, our hope in the Lord. That's what we all have. And in our relationship, it's not about what God does or God doesn't do when it's all said and done. You know what it is? It's about who God is. Who God is. God is not the miracles that he does or the miracles he does. That's not who God is. God is the good and faithful God, the God who sees you all through eternity and sees your life, the one who is faithful for you today. Does God do? Absolutely, God does miracles. That's anytime I'm sick, that's what I pray for. Whenever you get sick, I pray for a miracle for you. And I love it when God does a miracle. That's where I start with God. But it's not the only type of healing that God does. And I'm fine with it because I know who God is. I know that he has the wisdom to understand the big picture that I don't. And he comforts me in my lack of knowledge and in my fear of that. He comforts me, and his grace is sufficient for me. And I know that if I put my hope in the Lord, he renews my strength. And I know for you, when you put your hope in the Lord, he will renew your strength. Whether it be to soar like an eagle or to run wild, or is it to just walk and hope you don't fall down? God is there. He renews our strength. I'd like to invite those who are going to pray to come up, people to come up. And at this time, and I'm very grateful for these people to pray. And I invite you also here in a moment to just come, and it doesn't matter who you meet. It's just about you and God, and they're going to pray for you, and they're going to touch you and believe God for a miracle in your life. And that's where we all start. As soon as I close my prayer, I'm going to turn right around and ask them to touch me too. I'm not only coming for myself, but I've had some people ask, can you stand in for me? I said, absolutely I can. People I care deeply about, and I want to see healed. And I don't know what kind of healing, if it's an emotional healing, if it's a mental healing, if it's a physical healing, it's healing. It's healing. And regardless, we believe in a God who does miracles. Let's ask God for that. And let us find our assurance and our confidence in who he is as a God who loves us, a God who is good, and he is always faithful. And let's trust him with that. But let's ask as he asks us to ask. Let's have that faith to do that. I invite you to stand. And what we're going to do, we're going to close with a song. We're going to close with a song. And the song is I Believe in Miracles. And I want you to listen to the words of the song. The author of the song, the young man who wrote it about his child who died. God didn't perform a miracle in that sense. God performed the perfect healing for his daughter. But he wrote it out of a position of a posture of deep pain and a deep trust in the goodness of God and who God is. And I don't know how this song will touch you, but I would ask that you'd be open and ask God to do this. So let's worship Jesus, and we're going to sing a couple lines of it. And then we're going to, I'll come back up and I'll invite you to come down and to receive prayer from who God has brought you to here today. So let's sing together this song in worship.